So I want to start today's deep dive with a question that it sounds like the setup to a bar joke, but I promise you it is deadly serious.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's a question that once you really hear the answer, it kind of unravels everything we're taught about success, especially in America. The question is, what is the difference between a janitor in rural Vermont and a Harvard-educated, high-flying executive at Merrill Lynch?
On paper.
Yeah, on paper.
Absolutely everything. I mean, you're talking about completely different universes, different education levels, different income brackets, different social circles, just different expectations for how their lives are supposed to play out.
Exactly. That is the logical answer. That is the answer we are all trained to give. But today, we're doing a deep dive into The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And this book basically takes that logical answer, tears it into these tiny little pieces, and then just sets it on fire.
It really does.
Because the story of these two men, Ronald James Reed, the janitor, and Richard C. Scone, the executive, is the perfect hook to understand why everything we think we know about money is probably wrong.
It really is the central paradox of finance. And honestly, it's why this specific source material is so compelling to me. We tend to think of money as a hard science, right? Like physics or engineering.
Right. Rules and laws.
Yeah, we think there are rules, there are laws, and if you're smart enough to learn the formulas and, plug the numbers into a spreadsheet, you get the right answer. If you're smart, you get rich. If you're not, well, you don't.
Right. It's supposed to be a meritocracy based on pure intellect. It's supposed to be math. If I know the formula for gravity, I can predict where the apple falls. So if I know the formula for investing, I should be able to predict where the money goes.
But Housel's entire argument, and really the mission of this deep dive, is to debunk that specific idea. Money isn't physics. It's not math at all. It's a soft skill. It is entirely rooted in psychology and behavior and all those messy human emotions.
And the janitor versus the executive is the smoking gun that proves it.
It's Exhibit A.
Let's unpack that story, because when I first read it, I actually had to Google it to make sure it was real. So in one corner, you have Ronald James Reed.
Right.
He was a janitor and a gas station attendant in rural Vermont. And we're not talking about some secret genius who was, inventing cold fusion in his garage.
No, not at all.
We are talking about a guy who chopped wood, fixed cars, and swept floors at a J.C. Penney for decades. He lived in a tiny little house. When he died at age 92 in 2014, people were expecting, a very modest estate, maybe just enough to cover the funeral.
Right. A life of hard, honest, but very low-wage labor. You'd expect the financial outcome to match the income input, logically.
Instead, the world found out that he was worth over $8 million.
Which is just staggering. It makes no sense on the surface.
$8 million. He left $2 million to his stepkids and another $6 million to his local library and hospital. And everyone, his neighbors, the media, the entire finance world is just asking, how? Did he win the lottery? Was he secretly a drug lord? Did he find a bag of cash in the woods?
And the answer is so boring, it's almost frustrating.
It's the most boring answer possible.
He saved. He lived incredibly frugally. He bought blue-chip stocks, the big stable companies. And then, and this is the absolute key, he just waited.
He just waited.
He waited for decades. He let compound interest do all the heavy lifting while he just lived his quiet life. He didn't touch it. He didn't panic when the market went down. He just let it bake.
Okay, so keep that in your mind. The patient janitor. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Richard Scone.
Okay.
Harvard-educated. MBA from the University of Chicago. He was a rising star at Merrill Lynch. He was on Crane's 40 under 40 list of successful business people. I mean, this guy was brilliant. He retired in his 40s to become a philanthropist.
So he had everything Ronald Reed didn't. He had the pedigree, the connections, the deep financial education. He knew how the sausage was made because he was one of the people making the sausage.
But then the 2008 financial crisis hits, and just a few months before Ronald Reed's death made headlines for his secret fortune, Richard Scone was filing for personal bankruptcy. He lost everything. His massive mansion, which, by the way, was 18,000 square feet with a swimming pool and an elevator.
Of course it had an elevator.
It was foreclosed on. He stood before a judge and said, quote, "I currently have no income."
It's just a brutal contrast. It's almost Shakespearean. But it proves the thesis of the book perfectly. The difference between these two men wasn't intelligence. Scone was objectively smarter in terms of IQ and financial literacy.
By a mile.
It wasn't even luck, not in the traditional sense. It was behavior. Ronald Reed was patient and consistent. Richard Scone was greedy and over-leveraged. He took on way too much debt.
That's the catchphrase for this whole discussion. In finance, how you behave matters way, way more than what you know.
Precisely. And this is unique to finance.
Hmm.
I mean, think about it. You can't teach a janitor to perform heart surgery better than a Harvard surgeon just by teaching them to be patient.
Right, that's absurd.
That's a technical skill. You can't teach a janitor to design a skyscraper better than an architect. But in finance, a janitor can absolutely 100% outperform the Harvard MBA if the janitor just has better behavioral control. That doesn't happen in other fields.
It really doesn't.
And that is why we have to stop looking at money as a spreadsheet and start looking at it as a mirror.
I love that image, a mirror. Okay, so if we're looking in the mirror, one of the first things we have to confront is the role of the invisible, the stuff we can't actually control. Housel talks about this concept of luck and risk being siblings, which I thought was such a fascinating way to frame it.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
Usually we think of them as opposites, good luck, bad luck.
Right. We love to build these clean narratives. If someone succeeds, we say it's because they were smart and they were hardworking. If they fail, we say they made bad choices or they were lazy. But Housel argues that luck and risk are actually the same mechanism. They are both a reality that outcomes in life are not 100% within our control.
And to illustrate this, the source material brings up the story of Bill Gates. Now, everyone knows Bill Gates is brilliant. We are not taking that away from him. He's a hard worker. He's a visionary.
No question.
But the book highlights a specific data point about his high school experience that I think most people just gloss over, or maybe they just don't know the math behind it.
It's the Lakeside School statistic. This is a crucial context. So Bill Gates grew up in Seattle and went to Lakeside School starting in roughly 1968. Now, this school had a computer.
Which was, at the time, like having a spaceship.
Exactly. And not just any computer. They had a teletype Model 33 that was connected via a phone line to a mainframe computer.
Right, and we need to clarify for anyone younger listening, this is 1968. Personal computers didn't exist. Most colleges didn't have this kind of access, let alone high schools.
That's the key. This wasn't an iPad in a classroom. This was cutting-edge, unbelievably expensive technology that even graduate students at top universities rarely got to touch. And here you have a group of 13-year-olds at a private high school who are given basically free rein to learn how to code on it.
So Housel breaks down the probability here, and it's just mind-blowing.
The math is staggering. In 1968, there were roughly, I think it was 303 million high school-age kids in the entire world.
The whole world.
About 18 million of them lived in the United States. About 270,000 lived in Washington State. A little over 100,000 lived in the Seattle area. And only about 300 went to Lakeside School.
So you do the math.
It's literally 1 in a million. Bill Gates had a 1 in a million chance of attending the one high school that gave him access to a computer where he could learn to code at age 13, years before almost anyone else's age.
Oh.
And Gates himself admits it. He says, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft. It's a straight line.
That is the definition of luck. It doesn't mean he didn't work hard, of course, but that opportunity was a lightning strike. It was a winning lottery ticket he didn't even know he bought. But here is where it gets really interesting. Or tragic, really. We have to talk about Ken Evans.
The counterpoint, yes. This is the part of the Gates story that gets left out of the biopics and the rah-rah success stories.
Who was Ken Evans?
Ken Evans was Bill Gates' best friend at Lakeside. And by all accounts, including Gates' own, Kent was just as brilliant, just as ambitious, and just as obsessed with computers as Bill was. They were a team. They were going to conquer the world together.
They were supposed to be the founders of Microsoft together. It wasn't supposed to be Gates and Paul Allen. It was supposed to be Gates and Evans.
That was the plan. But before they graduated high school, Kent Evans went on a mountaineering trip. And in just a freak accident, a tragic accident, he fell and died.
Which is just heartbreaking to even think about.
It is deeply sad. But look at the statistics again through Housel's lens. The odds of a high school student in the U.S. being killed in a mountaineering accident are roughly 1 in a million.
Whoa! So the same odds.
Exactly the same odds. So you have Bill Gates, who experienced the 1 in a million luck of getting into Lakeside. And you have Ken Evans standing right next to him, who experienced the 1 in a million risk of a tragic accident.
They were equally smart, equally driven, standing in the same room, breathing the same air.
But the universe just pushed them in diametrically opposite directions. One got the tailwind, one got the headwind.
That really drives home the point that luck and risk are siblings. They are the same force, the reality that the world is chaotic and that outcomes are not guaranteed.
Exactly. And the takeaway here isn't to be fatalistic. It's not to say, oh, nothing matters, it's all random. It's to be humble. When you win, you have to acknowledge that luck played a role. You aren't just a genius who did it all yourself. And when you fail, or when you see someone else fail, you have to be compassionate. It might not be because of laziness or stupidity. It might just be risk showing up at their door instead of luck.
That humility is so hard, though, especially in a culture that worships the billionaire and blames the broke. We want to believe that net worth equals self-worth.
We do.
Which brings us to the next big trap Housel identifies. And this one really, really resonated with me. The trap of never enough.
Ah, yes. This is the psychological trap that catches the smartest, most successful people. It's insidious.
There is this great anecdote in the book about Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22, and Kurt Vonnegut, two absolute titans of literature. They're at a party on Shelter Island hosted by some billionaire hedge fund manager.
You can just picture the scene, right? It's lavish, there's expensive champagne, the who's who of Wall Street is there. And Kurt Vonnegut, being Vonnegut, turns to Joseph Heller and says, kind of poking him, you know, this host, this hedge fund manager, makes more money in a single day than you made from the entire history of Catch-22.
That is a sting. That's a dig. It's meant to hurt.
It is. And Catch-22 is one of the most popular, successful books of the 20th century. It's a masterpiece. So he's trying to make Heller feel small. But Heller's response is just legendary. He looks at Vonnegut without missing a beat and says, yes, but I have something he will never have.
And Vonnegut asks what?
And Heller says, enough.
It gives you chills, doesn't it? Enough. It's a concept that is almost extinct in modern finance. The goalpost is always moving.
Always. And that is the danger. When you don't have a sense of enough, you start doing crazy things. You start taking risks that have absolutely no real upside, only downside. And to really understand this, we have to talk about Rajat Gupta.
This story actually made me angry when I read it because it just seems so unnecessary.
It is deeply frustrating because it defies all logic. Rajat Gupta was the CEO of McKinsey, which is arguably the most prestigious consulting firm in the world. After he retired, he sat on the board of Goldman Sachs and Procter & Gamble. He was a major philanthropist. He was worth $100 million.
$100 million?
By any reasonable standard, he had won the game of life. He was set. His family was set. His grandkids were set.
You could do anything with that. You could disappear to an island. You could fund hospitals. You could live for 1,000 lifetimes and never run out of money.
But he didn't want to disappear. He hung out with billionaires. He was in these circles with hedge fund titans who were making $1 billion a year. And suddenly, compared to them, his $100 million felt small. He felt poor.
Wow.
He wanted to be a billionaire. That became his new goalpost.
So what did he do?
In 2008, during the absolute height of the financial crisis, Warren Buffett agreed to inject $5 billion into Goldman Sachs to save the bank.
Yeah.
This was top secret, market-moving information. Rajat Gupta was on the board call where this was announced. The second he hung up the phone, seconds later, he called a hedge fund manager named Rajaratnam and pipped him off.
He engaged in insider trading.
Blatant insider trading.
Yeah.
He went to prison for it. He destroyed his reputation, his career, his legacy. Everything he had built over 40 years was gone in an instant. And for what? To go from super rich to super, super rich.
It's the psychology of the moving goalpost. When your expectations rise in tandem with your results, you never feel satisfied. It's like running on a treadmill that speeds up every time you take a step. You're working harder and harder, but you're still in the same place emotionally.
And Housel connects this directly to social comparison, which I think we all struggle with, especially now, thanks to social media. There's this ladder. You're the rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year, which is a ton of money. But then you look at Mike Trout, your teammate, making $430 million.
And Mike Trout looks at the hedge fund manager who owns the team, who's making $700 million a year. And that hedge fund manager looks at Warren Buffett, and Buffett looks at Jeff Bezos.
There is always a bigger fish. Always. And if your goal is to be the biggest fish in the ocean, you will never be happy. You will take risks you shouldn't take, like Rajat Gupta or Bernie Madoff. Remember, Madoff was a legitimate, wildly successful businessman before the Ponzi scheme.
Right. He didn't need to do it.
He just couldn't handle a down year. He couldn't handle not enough. He couldn't stand the idea of his rich friends doing better than him.
So the lesson is there is no finish line. The finish line is a mirage that just keeps moving away from you.
Exactly. The only way to win is to stop playing the comparison game. You have to define what enough is for you, for your family, for your actual needs, and then have the discipline to stop moving the goalpost when you get there.
Speaking of Warren Buffett, let's pivot back to him. because we always talk about him as this investing genius, which he is. But the source material points out a specific math fact about his wealth that completely reframes his success. It's not just about how good he is, it's about how long he's been good.
This is one of my absolute favorite stats in the whole book. It just puts everything into perspective. So Warren Buffett's net worth is roughly, let's say, $84.5 billion, but $84.2 billion of that,
Almost all of it.
almost all of it, accumulated after his 50th birthday.
That is insane. So almost all of his money came when he was eligible for an AARP card.
Basically. And get this, $81.5 billion came after he qualifies for Social Security. The key insight here isn't just that he's a good investor. It's that he has been a good investor for 80 years. He started investing when he was 10 years old.
10. I was collecting baseball cards.
Right. And there's this great what-if scenario the book poses. What if Buffett was just a normal guy? What if he went to college, got a job, started investing at 30, like most of us, and then retired at 60 to play golf? If he had done that, even with his incredible 22% annual returns, even if he was still the best stock picker in the world, his net worth today wouldn't be $84.5 billion. It would be about $11.9 million.
Oh, wait, let me process that. From over $84 billion to just under $12 million.
That is the power of compounding. The difference is 99.9%. His actual secret isn't just his ROI, his return on investment. It is time. Time is the exponent, and the exponent is the most powerful number in the entire equation.
So when we try to copy Buffett, we're usually trying to copy his stock picks. We read his letters, we buy what he buys, but we can't copy his time.
We can't go back and start at age 10. But we can understand the mechanic. And Housel uses this brilliant analogy about the Ice Ages to explain how compounding actually works in the real world.
Yes, the Ice Age theory. This actually helped me understand compounding better than any math chart I've ever seen in my life.
It comes from 19th century science. For a long time, scientists thought ice ages were caused by the Earth shifting on its axis and creating these super cold winters. It made sense. Big ice requires big cold.
Seems logical.
But the math didn't work. The winters weren't cold enough. It turns out ice ages are actually caused by cool summers.
Cool summers? That sounds completely counterintuitive.
It does. But here is the logic. If you have a summer that isn't hot enough to melt all of the previous winter's snow, that snow stays on the ground, then the next winter, new snow falls on top of it. Now you have a thicker layer.
And snow is white, so it reflects sunlight away from the Earth.
Exactly. That accumulation of snow reflects sunlight, which cools the Earth a little bit more, which leads to even more snow staying the next summer. It's a feedback loop. A little bit of leftover snow eventually becomes a glacier, and then a glacier becomes a continental ice age.
So you don't need a catastrophe to freeze the world. You just need a little bit of snow left over consistently.
Exactly. Now, apply that to your wealth. You don't need big wins. You don't need to hit the lottery or pick the next Amazon every single year. You just need cool summers. You need consistency. You need to prevent your progress from melting away during the bad times.
You need to avoid big losses.
That's the key. If you save a little bit and you don't touch it and you let it grow and you just repeat that for a long time, you get a financial ice age. You get massive wealth.
But the hard part is that not touching it part. It sounds so easy on paper, but life gets in the way. Which brings us to the next distinction: getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
These are two completely different skill sets, and we often confuse them. You think if someone knows how to make a lot of money, they must know how to keep it. But history is just littered with people who made millions and lost it all.
And we have another tale of two investors here to illustrate this point: Jesse Livermore and Abraham Jermansky.
Jesse Livermore is an absolute legend in trading circles. He was basically a day trader back in the early 20th century, before computers. He was a genius at reading the market's mood, reading the tape.
And in 1929, he made his big move.
The Great Crash. When the market crashed and everyone was jumping out of windows, Livermore had shorted the market. He bet it would go down.
He made a fortune while the world burned.
He made the equivalent of $3 billion in a single day. $3 billion. He came home and his family was crying because they thought they were ruined like all their neighbors, and he had to tell them, no, actually, we're richer than we've ever been.
He must have felt invincible, like a god.
He did, and that was his downfall. See, getting wealthy requires optimism. You have to take risks. You have to believe the future will be good, or at least that you can predict it. But Livermore kept that same optimistic, risk-taking attitude after he made the money.
He kept making huge bets.
He kept betting big. He thought he couldn't lose. He doubled down, tripled down.
And he lost it all.
He lost all of it in the subsequent years. He went completely broke. He eventually took his own life in a hotel room in New York. It's a tragic story of a man who knew how to push the gas pedal to the floor but didn't know where the brake was.
And then briefly, Abraham Jermansky.
A similar story. Jermansky was a real estate developer who was worth millions in the roaring 20s. He was hugely successful, but he was leveraged up to his eyeballs. When the 1929 crash hit, the banks called his loans and he lost everything in a flash, and he just disappeared, vanished. No one ever knew what happened to him.
So the lesson here is that the skills that get you rich, that optimism, swinging for the fences, supreme confidence, are the exact opposite of the skills needed to stay rich.
Staying wealthy requires paranoia, it requires humility, it requires a deep-seated fear that what you've made can be taken away in an instant. It's about survival. You have to shift gears from attack to defense.
Survival. That brings up the barbell strategy that Housel discusses. Can you explain that? It's such a great visual.
It's the idea that you should be two things at once. You should be optimistic about the very long term, but paranoid about the short term.
Okay.
You need to believe that over 10 or 20 or 30 years, the world will get better, innovation will continue, and your investments in great companies will grow. But you also need to be terrified that the market could crash by 40% tomorrow, or you could lose your job next week.
So you save like a pessimist, but you invest like an optimist.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
And you need that savings, that cash, not because it earns a great return. Cash is a terrible investment in terms of return. But you hold it because it buys you the ability to survive the downturns without being forced to sell your stocks at the worst possible time. House uses this great analogy of the German tanks in World War II.
Oh, the field mice. I laughed out loud when I read this part.
It's a fantastic historical nugget.
Yeah.
So the Germans had these incredible tanks. They were engineered to perfection. They had better armor, better guns than the Allied tanks. On paper, they should have been unstoppable, but they kept breaking down in the field.
Oh, what was the problem?
It was discovered that field mice were crawling into the engines and chewing through the insulation on the electrical wires.
No way. Mice.
They planned for enemy fire. They planned for rough terrain. They planned for fuel shortages. They had a plan for everything. But they didn't plan for mice.
They couldn't foresee that one tiny risk.
Exactly. And in your financial life, you have field mice. You have unexpected car repairs, sudden medical bills, a global pandemic, a roof leak. You save for the field mice. You need a margin of safety. If you are leveraged to the hilt because you're trying to maximize every single dollar and be efficient, a single mouse can destroy your whole tank.
That margin of safety might look inefficient on a spreadsheet. I mean, holding cash in a savings account, earning 1%, feels like you're losing money when the market is up 20%. But psychologically, it's what keeps you in the game.
And staying in the game is the only way to capture what Housel calls the tails.
Tails you win. This section really challenged my perfectionism because we grew up in a school system where you have to be right all the time. If you get 50% on a test, you fail. If you're a doctor and you're right 50% of the time, you get sued.
You lose your license.
But in investing, you can be wrong half the time or even most of the time and still make an absolute fortune.
It's the long-tail distribution. In finance and in business, a tiny number of massive events drive the majority of outcomes. Housel talks about Heinz Berggruen, this famous art collector. He sold a collection to the German government for over $100 million. People thought he was an art genius who could spot value where no one else could.
But the reality was he just bought everything.
He bought massive quantities of art, thousands and thousands of pieces. Most of it was worthless. Some of it was just okay. But he happened to hold a few Picassos, a few Brocks, a few Klees that went up in value so much that they paid for all the duds, and then some.
It's like venture capital. A VC firm invests in 50 companies, 40 of them go bust, 5 do okay and return their money. And one is Uber, and the Uber investment pays for all the other failures 10 times over.
Exactly. And we see this in big business too. Disney is a great example from the book. In the mid-1930s, the Disney studio was a financial disaster. They produced hundreds of cartoons, Mickey Mouse, everything, but they were barely scraping by. They were constantly on the verge of bankruptcy.
And then Snow White.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It generated $8 million in 1938. In today's money, That is hundreds and hundreds of millions. That one movie, that one tail event, paid off all the company's debts, bought them the new studio in Burbank, gave everyone bonuses, and basically funded the company's entire future.
Or Amazon. We look at Amazon as this unstoppable juggernaut today, but do you remember the Fire Phone?
A total, complete disaster. They wrote down millions and millions on that.
But it didn't matter, because they had Amazon Web Services, AWS, and they had Prime. Those are the tails. Those two things paid for 1,000 Fire Phones.
So the takeaway for you, the listener, is that you have to be comfortable with being wrong. You have to be comfortable with most of your portfolio looking mediocre a lot of the time. You are waiting for the tail event. If you panic when things aren't working perfectly, you sell before the tail arrives. You have to endure the boredom to get the magic.
So you endure the boredom, the field mice, the failures, all to get the jackpot. But what is the jackpot? What are we actually trying to buy with all this compounding and survival? Is it a yacht? A mansion?
No. And this brings us to what I think is the most important section of the book, freedom, the highest dividend. I think this resonates with our generation more than anything else.
Hal Dios argues that the highest form of wealth isn't stuff. It's not the fancy car or the big house. It is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today.
Control, autonomy. There was this amazing research by Angus Campbell, a psychologist at the University of Michigan. He studied what made people happy. He looked at income, geography, education level, age, and he didn't find a strong correlation with any of those traditional metrics.
So the guy with the mansion wasn't necessarily any happier than the guy in the apartment.
Not at all. But the one thing that did correlate strongly with happiness was having a strong sense of controlling one's own life. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want. That, he found, is the universal definition of happiness.
But the trap is, we think buying stuff will make us happy. And to buy more stuff, we have to work harder. And to work harder, we give up control of our time. So we become richer, but we actually become less free.
Precisely. We trade our autonomy for objects. We get the golden handcuffs. And this leads directly to what Housel calls the man-in-the-car paradox.
I love this story because I used to do this all the time. I think we all do. You see a Ferrari or a Lamborghini driving down the street, it rumbles by. What is the first thing you think?
You think, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm so cool. They'd think I was successful. I would look amazing.
Exactly. You imagine yourself in the car. You visualize your arm out the window, the wind in your hair. But do you ever look at the actual driver and think, wow, that guy driving is so cool?
Almost never. You don't care about the driver. You might not even really see the driver. You are using his car to fuel your own fantasy about yourself.
That's the paradox. You buy luxury goods to get respect and admiration from others. But people don't admire you. They admire the object. In a weird way, the driver is invisible. The car gets all the attention.
So if your goal is to get respect, a Ferrari is actually a terrible investment. If you want respect, be kind, be humble, be helpful. Those things actually generate genuine respect from other people. A Ferrari just gets you stared at.
And spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. Housel brings up Rihanna here. She nearly went bankrupt early in her career.
Yeah, she sued her financial advisor. She basically said, I'm broke. How did this happen? And the advisor's defense was just classic. He said, was it really necessary to tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money?
It sounds incredibly snarky, but it's a profound truth.
It is. We struggle with this concept. Wealth is what you don't see. Wealth is the nice car not purchased, the diamonds not bought, the first-class upgrades declined. Wealth is the unspent savings in your account that give you freedom and options and control over your time.
But we can't see that. I can't see your bank account balance. I can only see the car in your driveway, so we judge success by the driveway.
We have to stop doing that. We have to realize that rich means you have high current income. You spend a lot. You have visible stuff. Wealthy means you have freedom and unspent assets. They're not the same thing at all. You can be rich and completely broke. You can be wealthy and look totally average.
That is a very hard mental shift to make. We are trained from birth to display status. Okay, let's unpack this next concept because it validates a lot of my own bad financial habits. Reasonable is better than rational.
This is a controversial one for the hardcore finance nerds, the spreadsheet jockeys.
The idea is that we shouldn't try to be mathematically rational robots when it comes to money. We should just try to be reasonable humans.
Right. Academic finance says you should always make the decision that maximizes your expected return. The spreadsheet has an optimal answer. But real life happens at the dinner table, not in a spreadsheet. We have fear, we have greed, we have emotions. Housel uses the wild story of the syphilis cure to illustrate this.
Julius Wagner-Jauregg, he won a Nobel Prize for this, which is just insane to think about now.
He did. This is before penicillin, before any antibiotics. Syphilis was a death sentence. It attacks the brain, you go insane, and then you die. Horribly. Wagner-Jauregg discovered that the syphilis bacteria die at very high temperatures. They can't survive a high fever.
So he needed to give his patients a fever somehow.
Exactly. So he started injecting his syphilis patients with malaria.
Malaria, which is another terrible, deadly disease.
It is. But malaria causes incredibly high shivering fevers. The fever would kill the syphilis bacteria, and then the doctors could treat the malaria with quinine, which they had a cure for. It was dangerous. It was in many ways irrational to give a sick person another serious disease. But it was reasonable given that the alternative was certain horrible death.
It was a messy, imperfect solution for a messy, imperfect problem. So how does this apply to money?
Well, take the classic debate about paying off your mortgage early. Mathematically, if your mortgage interest rate is, say, 3% and the stock market returns 8% on average over the long term, you should never pay off the mortgage. You should keep the debt, invest the extra cash, and earn the 5% spread.
That is the rational answer. A robot would do that every single time.
But I hate debt. It stresses me out. I feel this weight on my shoulders when I owe money.
Exactly. And if that stress causes you to panic during a market crash and sell all your stocks at the bottom because you feel insecure about having all that debt, then the rational strategy just failed you. You lost a ton of money. So the reasonable strategy is to pay off the house, even if the math is suboptimal on paper.
Yes, because if you pay off the house, you sleep better at night. And if you sleep better and you feel secure, you are much more likely to hold on to your other investments during a crisis. You are maximizing your ability to stick to the plan, not maximizing the theoretical ROI of every single dollar.
The best financial strategy is the one that lets you sleep at night.
Period. End of story. If you love day trading with a tiny, tiny bit of your money because it scratches an itch and it's fun for you, do it. It might not be rational. You probably lose money. But if it prevents you from gambling with your whole 401k, then it's a reasonable strategy. It's a fee you pay for entertainment and for the stability of the rest of your portfolio.
I feel seen. I feel so validated right now. Okay, moving on to the big psychological battle. Pessimism versus optimism. Why does pessimism always sound so much smarter?
It's evolution. Pure and simple. We are wired to react to threats immediately and with great urgency. Imagine you're a caveman on the savannah. You hear a rustle in the tall grass.
The optimist says, oh, it's probably just the wind.
And the pessimist says, it's a lion, and runs away. Now, if it was a lion, the optimist is dead. The pessimist survives to pass on his paranoid genes. We are the descendants of the pessimists. We pay much more attention to bad news because, for most of human history, it's what saved our lives.
So we are naturally attracted to warnings and doomsday predictions.
We cling to them. And intellectually, pessimism just sounds more profound. If someone comes on TV and says, the market is going to crash, debt levels are too high, geopolitical tension is rising, they sound like they've done their research. They sound serious and intelligent.
But if someone says, things will probably get better over the long run, they sound naive. They sound like a salesman who's pitching you a product.
But Housel argues that optimism is actually the better, more rational bet. Not blind optimism, but historical optimism.
And why is that?
Because the asymmetry of how things happen in the world. Destruction is fast and dramatic. Growth is slow and almost invisible.
Give us an example of that.
Pearl Harbor.
Huh?
9/11. The 2008 market crash. The start of the pandemic. These events happen in an instant. They are loud. They are terrifying. They headline the news for weeks. You can't miss them. But progress. Progress is invisible.
How so?
It's cancer. Death rates dropping by 1% a year. Every year. It's computing power doubling every 2 years. It's solar energy getting 5% cheaper. You don't see it happen day to day. There's no headline that says, world slightly better today than yesterday.
The Wright brothers are the perfect example of this from the book.
Yes. This story just blows my mind. Wilbur and Orville Wright flew for the first time in 1903. Kitty Hawk? It was a miracle. Humans conquered the sky. It changed everything about civilization. And do you know how much coverage it got?
Almost none, right? It was buried in the back pages.
The New York Times didn't mention it for years. People didn't believe it. It was seen as a weird hobby, a toy. It was a slow, grinding progress. The first planes were flimsy. They crashed a lot. But look where we are now. We fly across oceans at 500 miles an hour while watching movies and drinking a tiny bottle of wine.
So the lesson is, miracles happen slowly and go unnoticed. Disasters happen instantly and dominate the news cycle.
Correct. So you have to be an optimist about the long term, believing that humans are incredible at solving problems and things generally get better, even if you're a pessimist about the short term. The graph of human progress goes up and to the right, but it's a very, very bumpy line along the way.
I love that. It gives me hope. Now, we have to talk about history, because to understand why we behave the way we do with money today, we have to look at where we came from, specifically the post-World War II era.
This is the history and the changing consumer section, and it really explains the modern debt crisis. You cannot understand the year 2024 without understanding the year 1945.
So take us back. It's 1945, the war ends.
The war ends. You have millions of GIs coming home from Europe and the Pacific. The government is terrified. They think the economy is going to slide right back into the Great Depression because all that war production has stopped. So they do something radical. They make credit incredibly cheap and accessible.
Low interest rates.
Super low rates. The GI Bill. They basically encourage borrowing to buy homes in the suburbs and to buy cars. They wanted to stimulate consumption at all costs.
And it worked. It created the modern American middle class.
It worked beautifully. We created a booming middle class. But here is the absolute key. In the 1950s and 60s, income growth was shared across the board. The rich got richer, but so did the poor and the middle class. The gap wasn't that wide. A single factory worker could buy a house and a car and support a family on one income.
It was the era of the American dream.
But then, fast forward to the 1980s and onward, the economy kept growing, but the distribution of that growth changed dramatically. Incomes for the ultra-wealthy skyrocketed. Incomes for the middle class and the working class stagnated. They went flat.
But, and this is the big, but people's expectations didn't change.
Exactly. We still expected to live that 1950s lifestyle of constant upgrades. Bigger houses, nicer cars, better vacations.
Yeah.
That is the cultural narrative we're all swimming in. But the paycheck wasn't supporting it anymore. So how do we bridge that gap between expectations and reality?
Get?
Massive amounts of debt, the big stretch. We borrowed to maintain a lifestyle we thought we deserved because it's what our parents had or what we saw on TV. And now we're all living with the psychological hangover of that era. We judge ourselves by what our neighbors have, but our neighbors are drowning in credit card debt and car loans just to keep up appearances.
It brings it all full circle, back to psychology. It's not about the math on the credit card statement. It's about the story we tell ourselves about what we deserve.
And realizing that the game has changed. You cannot play the 1950s game in the 2020s economy without risking ruin. You have to write your own rules.
So let's bring this all home. What does this all mean for the listener right now? If they're sitting in their car or at the gym, what should they do differently after hearing this?
I think it means accepting, first and foremost, that money is not about intelligence. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need a fancy degree. You need discipline, patience, and emotional control.
It means realizing that wealth isn't the Ferrari. Wealth is the ability to wake up in the morning and say, I own my time today.
And it means understanding that you will change. Housel talks about this thing called the end of history illusion. It's the psychological bias where we think that the person we are today is the final version. We think we're a finished product.
But you won't be.
You won't be. The you of 10 years from now will have different goals, different dreams, different values. So don't lock yourself into a rigid financial plan that requires you to be the same person at 50 that you were at 20.
Plan for a future self you haven't even met yet.
Leave room for error. Save for the field mice. And define your own game. Don't play the day trader's game if you're a long-term investor. Don't play the billionaire's game if your goal is just independence and freedom.
That is the ultimate takeaway. Stop looking at the scoreboard. Stop looking at your neighbor's new car. Look in the mirror. Be reasonable. Be patient. And just keep showing up day after day.
That's the path to true wealth. It's not a secret formula. It's just good behavior repeated for a long time.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.